My old life didn't just end. It sublimated, turning from a solid reality into a ghost. It concluded not with a bang, but with the quiet glow of a classified ad discovered in the desperate, silent hours after midnight. For 3 agonizing months, I had been a man out of time, a casualty of a corporate layoff that had severed me from my own future. I was an architect. I designed futures for other people, and now I didn't have one of my own. I was adrift in an apartment that had become a stark monument to my failure, each overdue bill a small, sharp-edged tombstone on the grave of my career. My bank account wasn't just a joke. It was a cruel, mocking specter, a rounding error that laughed at the very concept of a safety net. The dwindling number on the screen was a constant, soul-crushing presence, a digital heartbeat counting down to absolute zero. So when I saw the ad for a night security guard at the Starlight Motel, it wasn't a choice. It was the only door left standing in a long, dark corridor of slammed doors and dead ends. No experience necessary, it read, a phrase that felt both like a blessing and an insult. Must be reliable and comfortable with solitude. I wasn't sure if I was reliable anymore. My own self-worth eroded to dust, but I had become a connoisseur of solitude, a master of the empty room and the silent phone. The Starlight Motel was less a building and more a scarification on the flesh of the landscape. It stood 10 miles out of town, a 2-story, L-shaped relic of a forgotten, more hopeful America. Out there, you could feel the immense, crushing weight of the sky, a vast, starless canvas that pressed down on the flat, featureless plains, extinguishing all light and sound. The motel's sign, a rusted starburst of neon, was a portrait of decay. A few letters, STAR, flickered feebly against the oppressive ink-black darkness, a dying celestial body giving its last sputtering gasp. This wasn't a place people chose to go. It was a place they ended up when the road, and their luck, had finally run out. And my road had dissolved into nothingness. The man who hired me was named Frank. He was a stooped, skeletal figure, folded in on himself by time and gravity, as if trying to shrink away from the world. His skin was like old parchment, thin and dry, and mapped with 1,000 tiny cracks, and his eyes held the weary, hollow resignation of a man who has seen too much to ever be surprised again. The interview was a perfunctory formality, held in a lobby that smelled of a trinity of despair. Decades of stale cigarette smoke, cheap pine cleaner, and something else. Something organic and vaguely sweet, like flowers left to rot in their vase. He didn't ask about my work history or my references. He didn't care about the buildings I had designed or the life I had lost. His questions were far more peculiar, far more unsettling. Got a steady heartbeat? He rasped, his voice a gravelly rumble that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep in the earth. I nodded, my own heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. It's fine. You prone to flights of fancy? An overactive imagination? His gaze was unnervingly direct, probing. No, sir. I lied, the monstrous shapes my debts formed in the dark of my apartment flashing through my mind. My imagination is firmly in check. He grunted, a dry, rattling sound of grim satisfaction. Good. The last one, he had too many fancies. Saw things that weren't there. Then he saw something that was. Frank didn't elaborate, and the cold dread that settled in my gut told me not to ask. The job was mine. The pay was suspiciously generous for a position that, on the surface, involved little more than watching a bank of grainy, black and white monitors and making sure the guests didn't steal the towels. The rules are simple, Frank said, his eyes flicking toward the silent monitors, then back to me, holding my gaze for a moment too long. He slid a thin, vinyl-bound booklet across the scarred wooden desk. It was a faded beige color, with Starlight Motel Employee Handbook embossed on the front in peeling, tarnished gold letters. Do your rounds every 2 hours. Keep the living guests from killing each other. And whatever you do, he tapped the booklet with a gnarled, nicotine-stained finger, his nail yellowed and thick. Don't lose this. Everything you need to know is in there. Study it, learn it, memorize it. It's your only friend out here. That first night, the silence was the first thing that truly hit me. It wasn't just quiet. It was a profound, suffocating emptiness. It was a vacuum, the kind of silence that has weight and texture, that presses in on your eardrums and makes you hear the frantic drumming of your own blood. I settled into the worn office chair, the springs groaning in protest like a tired old man. The monitor showed a silent, empty world, deserted hallways, a parking lot populated only by shadows, and the ghostly, still surface of the covered pool, its water like a sheet of polished obsidian. To pass the time, and to heed Frank's ominous warning, I opened the handbook. The first several pages were a sedative of corporate policy. Fire safety, guest relations, cleaning protocols for various unspeakable stains. Standard mind-numbing stuff. But then I found it. Tucked at the very back, separated by a thick black card divider, was an appendix. It was thicker than the rest of the book combined, its pages a different, older-looking paper stock, brittle and yellowed at the edges. It was labeled in a severe, typewritten font, Appendix C, Permanent Residence and Associated Protocols. My brow furrowed. The Starlight was a transient place, a last resort for weary travelers or people on the run from their lives. No one stayed here long enough to be called a resident, let alone a permanent one. What followed was a list of room numbers, each with a name and a set of instructions so bizarre, so specific, they made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Room 104, The Weeper, Eleanor Vance. Occupant may produce audible sounds of distress, primarily between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. This is a residual psychic impression, an emotional stain. Do not attempt to investigate or make contact. Under no circumstances should you attempt to offer comfort. Her grief is a closed circuit. It is not for you, and she will resent the intrusion with profound consequences. Room 119, The Watcher, no given name. Occupant is passive but perpetually observant. You may feel as if you are being watched in the north wing stairwell, or catch a flicker of movement in your peripheral vision. This is normal. Do not attempt to locate the source of the sensation. Do not turn quickly. Acknowledging its presence directly is considered an act of aggression. It prefers to remain unseen, and it will ensure that it does. Room 207, The Humming Man, Mr. Abernathy. Occupant may occasionally be heard humming a simple, 5-note tune. The tune itself is harmless. However, it is a precursor. If the humming is heard, you have approximately 5 minutes before the gambler in room 113 becomes active. Consider the humming an early warning system. Vacate the first floor west corridor immediately. Room 218, The Traveler, Silas Croft. Occupant is known for misplacing his personal effects. If you find an old leather suitcase in the second floor hallway, do not touch it or attempt to move it. Report its precise location to day shift management. It will be returned by the appropriate channels. If the door to room 218 is discovered open, close it and lock it immediately. Do not look inside. Looking is an invitation, and Silas Croft is a very lonely man. Room 311, The Bride, Annalisa. Occupant is exceptionally shy and abhors being perceived. She may occasionally appear in reflective surfaces, mirrors, darkened windows, polished chrome. Do not make direct eye contact with her reflection. Acknowledge her presence with a slight, respectful nod, and then immediately look away. If a guest in an adjacent room complains of the sudden, overpowering scent of lavender, offer them a complimentary room change. Provide no explanation. The scent is a manifestation of her longing, and it is toxic to the living. The list went on and on. 14 entries in total, each one more chilling and insane than the last. The rules were a tapestry of madness. Don't whistle on the 3rd floor. If you see a trail of wet footprints leading from the pool, follow them until they stop, then turn around and walk away without looking back. If a guest complains about a phone in their room ringing, but the phone has been disconnected, that room must be left vacant for the next 24 hours for recalibration. Then I reached the final entry. It was different from the others. Stark. Absolute. It was set apart on its own page, the text in a bold, severe font that felt like a shout. Room 404. The collector, proprietor, vacant. This room is to remain locked and sealed at all times. The entire west wing of the 4th floor is structurally unsound and off-limits to all staff and guests. Entry is forbidden under any and all circumstances. No exceptions. If you hear noises from this room, you do not. If you see light from under the door, you do not. Your shift, your duties, your very existence does not include the west wing of the 4th floor. It does not exist. I leaned back in the chair, a deep, penetrating chill seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the rattling old air conditioner. This had to be a prank. A ridiculously elaborate piece of hazing for the new guy, designed by a bored and profoundly twisted mind. I let out a small, nervous laugh, but the sound was thin and brittle, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the office. Still, a part of my mind, the cold, analytical architect that I used to be, couldn't shake the unnerving specificity of it all. The names, the instructions, the interconnectedness of the rules, and that final, terrifying warning about a floor that supposedly didn't exist. My first few rounds were uneventful, almost disappointingly so. I walked the long hallways with their stained, swirling carpets, my flashlight beam a lonely sword cutting a path through the gloom. I checked the locks on the doors, peered out at the still, dark water of the covered pool, and listened to the rhythmic hum of the ancient ice machine. I was starting to feel foolish, letting a stupid, insane book get under my skin. I was building a careful, fragile sense of normalcy around myself, a psychological wall against the absurdity of the handbook. That construction, that fragile wall of denial, shattered at precisely 2:05 a.m. I was on the 1st floor, walking past the dark, unassuming door of room 104 when I heard it. It started as a faint, choked sob, the kind of sound you have to strain to hear, that you could easily dismiss as the wind. But it grew, blossoming into the unmistakable sound of a woman weeping. It wasn't loud, but it was raw, a desolate, hopeless grief that seemed to soak into the very air, making it heavy and cold and difficult to breathe. My first instinct, the human one, the one that hadn't yet been stamped out by months of desperation, was to help, to knock, to ask if she was okay. I took a step toward the door, my ear pressed against the cold, painted wood. The grief was overwhelming, a living thing in that room. I could feel it vibrating through the door, a profound sorrow that felt ancient and bottomless. It seeped into me, and to my horror, I felt my own eyes begin to sting with unbidden tears. I raised my hand to knock, my knuckles hovering inches from the surface. But the words from the handbook screamed in my mind, a blast of cold reason. Do not attempt to investigate. Her grief is a closed circuit. She will resent the intrusion. I froze, my hand trembling in the air. This didn't feel residual. It felt present, alive, and hungry. It felt like an exposed nerve. A profound cold washed over me, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. I suddenly felt like a trespasser, an intruder eavesdropping on a private agony not meant for my ears. Slowly, agonizingly, I lowered my hand. I backed away from the door, one deliberate step at a time, the sound of that heartbroken weeping following me all the way down the hall. Back in the relative safety of the office, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. With a surge of sickening dread, I checked the guest log. Room 104 was, and had been for days, officially empty. For a week, I lived in a state of willful, desperate ignorance. I did my rounds with my headphones on, blasting angry music into my ears, trying to drown out the motel's whispering secrets. I watched the monitors, I drank my coffee, and I told myself that what I heard was a trick of the wind, or faulty plumbing, or my own fraying mind. The handbook stayed locked in my locker, a forbidden text. The job was easy, the money was good, and I needed it. It was a simple transaction, my sanity for my survival. Then came a Tuesday night, during a fierce, crackling thunderstorm that knocked out the power for a few harrowing minutes. As I began my midnight round on the second floor, the emergency lights casting long, distorted, dancing shadows, I saw it. Sitting squarely in the middle of the worn floral carpet, illuminated by a brilliant flash of lightning, was a suitcase. It was made of old, battered brown leather, with brass buckles tarnished green with age. It was covered in faded travel stickers from places that no longer existed: the Ottoman Empire, Ceylon, the free city of Danzig. A wave of ice-water dread washed over me. I was standing directly in front of room 218. If you find an old, leather suitcase, do not touch it. As if summoned by my very thoughts, the door to room 218, which I had personally checked and locked not an hour earlier, swung inward with a low, agonizing groan of protesting wood. It revealed not a room, but a perfect square of pitch-black, absolute darkness. A darkness that didn't just absorb the emergency light from the hall, but seemed to actively drink it. If the door is found open, close it and lock it. Do not look inside. My gaze was locked on that yawning, dark doorway. Every nerve ending, every primal instinct, screamed at me to turn and run. But the door was open. My job, the rational part of my brain clinging to the rules Frank had given me like a rosary, told me I had to close it. I took a hesitant step forward, my boots squelching on the damp carpet. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a buzzing static electricity that made the fine hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand on end. As I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling violently, I forced myself to stare at a water stain on the opposite wall, focusing on its shape, anything to avoid looking into that void. But I could feel the darkness in the room. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was deeper, more profound. It seemed to have weight and presence, to pull at me. And from within that oppressive, silent blackness, I heard a sound. A soft, wet, dragging noise, the sound of heavy fabric being pulled across a damp floor. It was followed by a faint, guttural click, like a tongue clicking against the roof of a dry mouth. My courage evaporated into pure, unreasoning terror. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing down the hallway like a gunshot. My fingers, clumsy with panic, fumbled with my master keys. The lock clicking into place was the loudest, most beautifully final sound I had ever heard. I didn't wait. I turned and fled, not even daring to look back at the suitcase. I sprinted back to the office, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. On the monitor for the second-floor hallway, the corridor was pristine. The carpet was empty. The suitcase was gone. I should have quit then and there. Any sane person would have walked out into the storm and never looked back. But I was trapped by my empty bank account, by the shame of my failure, and by something else. A foolish, morbidly curious part of me, the part that wanted to understand how a building could be so fundamentally wrong, felt a bizarre sense of responsibility. I started carrying the handbook with me on my rounds, its vinyl cover smooth and strangely comforting in my pocket. It wasn't a prank. It was a manual for survival in a place that operated on its own set of twisted, malevolent physics. A few weeks later, an encounter with Annalisa, the bride in room 311, shattered my last remaining shreds of denial. At around 3 a.m., A guest in room 313 called the front desk, his voice a mixture of annoyance and groggy confusion. "Hey, weird question," he said, "but is someone burning incense or something? There's this incredibly strong smell of lavender coming from somewhere. It's giving me a headache." My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. Asterisk, offer them a room change. Provide no explanation. Asterisk, my apologies, sir, I said, my voice an unnaturally calm, professional mask. We've had some issues with the ventilation system on that floor. I can move you to a new room on a different floor immediately. I moved the grateful man to the first floor, and then against my better judgment, my morbid curiosity overriding my survival instinct, I went up to the third. The moment the elevator doors opened, the scent hit me like a physical blow. It was suffocating, a cloying chemical sweetness that was both floral and funereal, the scent of a forgotten funeral parlor. At the far end of the deserted hallway was a large, ornate mirror, its gilt frame tarnished with age. I remembered the rule with chilling, heart-stopping clarity. She may appear in reflective surfaces. Do not make direct eye contact. Curiosity is a treacherous, insidious thing. A siren song for the damned. I told myself I wouldn't look. I would just walk past. But I had to know. For just a fraction of a second, as I passed, I flickered my eyes up to the mirror. I saw the empty, lavender-choked hallway reflected behind me, but I wasn't alone. Standing about 20 feet away, her form hazy and indistinct as if viewed through heat haze, was the reflection of a woman in a high-collared, old-fashioned white dress. Her back was to me, the bride. My breath hitched in my throat. I tore my gaze away instantly, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against my sternum. I walked quickly, almost running, around the corner and down the nearest stairwell. In the echoing concrete stairwell, I fumbled for my phone, needing a distraction, a connection to the real, sane world. The screen was dark. As I pressed the power button, it flickered to life. The selfie camera opened by default, and in the brief reflection on the dark, glossy screen, I saw her. She was standing right behind me. Her face was inches from my own, pale and luminous as bone. Her dark, empty eyes holding an eternity of sorrow and a chilling, possessive curiosity. I made a strangled, terrified sound and dropped the phone. It clattered down the concrete steps, the sound echoing in the sudden, complete silence. I whipped around. Nothing. The stairwell was empty. The cloying scent of lavender was gone. This wasn't just a haunting anymore. This was an interaction. I was no longer an observer. I was part of the exhibit. The game had changed. The entities in the starlight weren't just residual psychic impressions or harmless oddities. They were aware. They were intelligent. And some of them were angry. The handbook's entry for room 113 was short and blunt. The gambler, Jacob. Occupant is a poor loser and detests being watched. If you feel a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature in the first floor west corridor, leave the area immediately. Do not linger. One night, a terrified guest in room 115 called the front desk, his voice a frantic whisper. "There's someone in the room next to me," he stammered. "He's going crazy. Throwing things, shouting, banging on the walls. It sounds like he's trying to break through." I promised to handle it and headed for the first floor, my dread a cold, heavy weight in my gut. As I turned into the west corridor, I could hear it a muffled banging, a snarled, vicious curse. Then the temperature plummeted. It was like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The air grew sharp and thin in my lungs, and my breath plumed in front of me in a thick white cloud. The handbook's rules screamed in my head. Leave the area immediately. My instincts, honed by weeks of escalating terror, agreed. But the guest in 115? He sounded genuinely frightened. I couldn't just abandon him. It was my job. Foolishly, tragically, I took another step into the corridor. The banging stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, watchful, and predatory. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling and thin, a pathetic bleat in the charged air. "Motel security." There was no response. Then I felt it. A pressure in the air, a palpable wave of pure, concentrated malice that washed over me, staggering me. And then something pushed me. It wasn't a gust of wind. It was a solid, violent, invisible shove to my chest that sent me crashing backward onto the floor. My head struck the wall with a sickening, wet thud. As I lay there, gasping for air, my vision swimming with black spots, I felt another sensation. An impossibly cold, firm grip on my ankle. It didn't just feel cold. It burned, a freezer burn that seemed to leach the warmth from my very bones. It was trying to drag me. Panic, absolute and blinding, surged through me. I kicked out with my free leg, connecting with nothing but empty air, but the grip held, icy and impossibly strong, pulling me inch by inch across the abrasive carpet toward the dark door, room 113. It was then that I understood with horrifying, soul-shattering clarity. They didn't just haunt their rooms. They wanted me to join them, to become another entry in the handbook, another permanent resident. My flailing hand closed around my fallen flashlight. With a surge of pure adrenaline, I swung it blindly behind me, back toward the thing holding my ankle. I felt a jolt, as if I'd struck a side of frozen beef, and the grip on my ankle vanished. I scrambled to my feet, crab walking backward before finding my footing and running, not stopping until I burst through the lobby doors and into the cool night air, my body shaking uncontrollably. My ankle throbbed with a phantom cold that felt like it had seeped into my very marrow. The game was over. I had broken the rules, and I had lost. I stumbled back inside, my mind made up. I was quitting. I was walking away. To hell with the money. To hell with everything. But as I reached for the phone to call Frank, the fire alarm began to blare, a deafening, shrieking wail that filled the entire motel with its synthetic scream. I spun toward the annunciator panel on the wall. A single red light was blinking, insistent and malevolent. The alarm had been pulled from one location, room 404. Asterisk, this room is to remain locked and sealed. Entry is forbidden. It does not exist. It was a summons. It was a trap. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to get in my car and drive until the sun came up. But the thought of the other guests, of a real fire, of people trapped, cursing myself, my job, my life, I grabbed the emergency override keys from the lockbox and headed for the 4th floor. The main elevator wouldn't respond. The button for the 4th floor was dark, lifeless, as if the elevator itself knew better than to go there. I had to take a narrow, steep service stairwell I'd never seen before, hidden behind a door marked maintenance. The air in the stairwell was thick with the smell of dust, rot, and something sickly sweet, like old embalming fluid. I pushed open the door at the top of the stairs and stepped out into a nightmare. The hallway was wrong. Utterly, fundamentally wrong. It wasn't carpeted. The floor was bare, rotting wood that groaned under my weight. The wallpaper was peeling off in long, leprous strips, revealing dark, water-stained plaster beneath. There were no room numbers on the doors, no light fixtures, only an oppressive gloom that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. And at the far end of this impossible corridor, which seemed to stretch on for longer than the building was wide, the door to room 404 stood slightly ajar, a sliver of profound, breathing darkness visible within. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing in the dead silence. The air grew so cold I could see my breath, thick and white. With a trembling hand, I pushed the heavy door open. It wasn't a motel room. It was a study or a macabre museum. The walls from floor to ceiling were lined with shelves of dark, almost black wood, and on those shelves sat hundreds of glass jars. Bell jars, mason jars, specimen jars of every shape and size. Inside each jar, suspended in a clear, viscous fluid that barely shimmered, was an object. A child's worn teddy bear with one button eye, a single silver earring, a tarnished brass pocket watch, frozen at 317, a dried, blackened rose. And etched into a small brass plaque on the wooden base beneath each jar was a name. Eleanor Vance, Silas Croft, Annalisa, Jacob. They were all there. All 14 names from the handbook. This wasn't a room. It was a trophy case, a collection, a soul trap. These objects weren't memories. They were anchors, binding them to this place for eternity. The collector wasn't just another ghost. He was the zookeeper, the warden, the proprietor. From the corners of the room, indistinct shadows began to coalesce, swirling and writhing like smoke, their silent whispers a cacophony of pain, regret, and desperate, pleading cries that scraped at the inside of my skull. And from behind a large, imposing mahogany desk, a new figure rose. It was taller, darker than the others, its form solidifying from the deepest shadows. The collector, the first proprietor of this cursed place. I felt his ancient, proprietary intelligence fix upon me. A cold, crushing weight on my soul. A single, powerful thought, not in words, but in pure, terrifying understanding, pushed its way into my mind. A voice that was not a voice. You have broken the rules. You have seen the collection. A collection must always grow. A vacancy must be filled. The 14 spirits, my erstwhile tormentors, surged forward. They moved not out of malice for me, but out of a terrible, desperate compulsion, a tidal wave of darkness and despair. They were the collector's hounds, and he had just unleashed them. I was about to become the 15th jar on the shelf. My anchor would be my flashlight, or maybe my car keys. My name etched on a brass plaque. I don't know what saved me. Primal terror, maybe. Or perhaps the ghosts themselves, in their last shred of humanity, wanted me to escape the fate they could not. I just turned and ran. I fled from that impossible room, from that horrifying hallway, the whispers and cries clawing at my back. I didn't use the stairs. I threw myself at the elevator doors, hammering the button, and by some impossible miracle, they opened. I didn't stop running until I was out of the building, gasping in the cool, pre-dawn air. I got in my car, turned the key, and drove. I floored the accelerator and never once looked in the rear view mirror, terrified of what I might see sitting in the back seat. I called Frank from a payphone 2 towns over, the sun just beginning to stain the eastern horizon with bruised purple and orange. I quit, I said, my voice a hoarse, broken thing. He didn't sound surprised. He just grunted, the same dry, dismissive sound he made when he hired me. The handbook is motel property, he said, his voice flat and dead, but you can keep it. Consider it a severance fee. It's not the book I'm worried about. It's what's inside it. You've earned it, kid. You saw the collection and walked away. Not many do. Then he hung up. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I can still feel that phantom cold in my ankle. A deep, abiding chill that no blanket can ever seem to warm. I'll catch a glimpse of movement in a dark window's reflection, or smell the faint, ghostly scent of lavender on the breeze when no flowers are near. I know they're still there. The weeper is still crying her silent, eternal tears. The traveler is still losing his suitcase, forever searching. And the collector is still waiting, patiently, for his next acquisition. Every room in that motel is a tomb, and the residents are permanent. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very core, that they're always looking for a new roommate. So, what would you have done? Would you have taken the job? Would you have opened the handbook? Or would you have left the motel's secrets undisturbed? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, and want to hear more tales from the dark side of the world, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets the algorithm know you want more, and honestly, it helps keep the lights on, which is something I've become very particular about lately. Thanks for stopping by.